Guang Qinghe once believed that if he quietly stayed away from Zhuang Cheng, they would both be safe. But in a single night, both of their secrets were exposed, pulling them into a chase with no way back. Zhuang Cheng always appeared cold and cautious. Yet time and time again, he quietly saved Qinghe from danger. And Qinghe, even when pushed to his limits, chose to protect Zhuang Cheng's secret instead of saving himself. That choice made Zhuang Cheng question, for the first time, whether Qinghe was truly different from every other fork. But just as the distance between them began to disappear, Zhuang Cheng's scarred past slowly came to light. Every scar hid a secret, and a promise of revenge that had never faded. Then Zhuang Cheng made an unexpected offer that could change both of their lives forever. Before Qinghe could give his answer, a mysterious stranger picked up their trail, and the final phone call ended with just one chilling sentence: "I found them." While Zhuang Cheng and Guang Qinghe had just left, the mysterious man had not given up searching for them. He believed that if he kept following their trail, he would eventually find them. At the same time, Zhuang Cheng brought Qinghe to a small motel hidden deep inside a quiet alley. It was secluded enough for the two of them to disappear from everyone's sight, at least for a while. He still could not understand why Zhuang Cheng seemed so familiar with the place. The moment they stepped into the cramped room, the atmosphere became unbearably tense. Qinghe tried to stay calm, but the close distance between them only made him more nervous. Then, a sound from the room next door suddenly shattered the silence. Qinghe instantly blushed and awkwardly avoided Zhuang Cheng's gaze. All he wanted was for the night to pass without anything else happening. But at that moment, Zhuang Cheng suddenly spoke. He told Qinghe to take off his coat and step closer. Those few words alone left Qinghe completely frozen. Countless thoughts raced wildly through his mind, but in the end, Qinghe chose to trust Zhuang Cheng. He slowly did as he was asked. The room fell silent once again, with only the sound of running water breaking the stillness. Zhuang Cheng watched Qinghe for a long time without saying a single word. The quieter Qinghe became, the more difficult it was to read the atmosphere. Then Zhuang Cheng suddenly noticed something. Qinghe's injuries were far less severe than he had expected. That discovery made Zhuang Cheng begin to question all of his previous assumptions. If Qinghe were truly like the others, things would never have unfolded this way, and for the first time, Zhuang Cheng began to wonder, was the person standing before him really the one he had always believed him to be? While checking Guang Qinghe's injuries again, Zhuang Cheng suddenly realized that Qinghe's earbud was missing. A thought briefly crossed his mind, but something else concerned him even more. At some point, the shower had already been switched to warm water. Qinghe paused the moment he noticed the small change. It was such an ordinary gesture, yet it had never existed between a cake and a fork. Qinghe quickly stepped back, while Zhuang Cheng froze in place. He suddenly realized that he had quietly shown concern for someone he had always hated. That realization made Zhuang Cheng immediately reject his own feelings. In his memories, every fork was the same. They lied, they were greedy, and they treated other people as nothing more than tools to use. He had once believed there might be an exception, but in the end, every one of them had betrayed that belief. So Zhuang Cheng forced himself to keep his distance from Qinghe once again. After returning to the room, Qinghe could not stop thinking about Zhuang Cheng's strange behavior. There was only one question he wanted to ask, but he could not find the courage to speak. Then, because he was too busy watching Zhuang Cheng, Qinghe accidentally bumped into the edge of a table more than once. That awkward moment made Zhuang Cheng laugh for the first time in a long while, but the smile quickly faded when he noticed that Qinghe's injuries still had not been treated. Zhuang Cheng pretended to stay cold, yet quietly tossed him a bottle of water and some salt. He simply told Qinghe to clean his wounds himself. Qinghe held those simple items as if they were a small sign of trust. Meanwhile, Zhuang Cheng turned away and walked off, convincing himself that it had only been a thoughtless gesture. But the more he tried to deny it, the more his heart seemed to waver. And that was what frightened him most. While Qinghe was still happy that Zhuang Cheng had prepared supplies to treat his wounds, he had no idea how to use them. Even opening a small packet of salt left Qinghe fumbling over and over again. In the end, Zhuang Cheng could not watch any longer and reached over to take his hand. He kept grumbling under his breath, yet his hands carefully prepared everything for Qinghe. Zhuang Cheng told himself that he simply did not want to clean up another mess. But Qinghe saw something completely different. For the first time, he felt that Zhuang Cheng's cold attitude had softened, even if only a little. Just earning a little more trust was enough to make Qinghe happy. Then Zhuang Cheng quietly told him to lift his head. Qinghe nervously closed his eyes. But the way Zhuang Cheng treated his wounds was gentler than he had imagined. The cuts stung slightly, but his heart gradually began to feel at peace. At that moment, Qinghe accidentally noticed a large scar on Zhuang Cheng's body. His gaze froze, and countless painful memories suddenly came together like pieces of a puzzle. Perhaps that scar was what had turned Zhuang Cheng's hatred of forks into an obsession that could never be erased. Without thinking, Qinghe instinctively reached out and touched the scar. In that single moment, the atmosphere instantly froze. Zhuang Cheng coldly ordered Qinghe to let go immediately. The bottle slipped to the floor, and the distance they had just begun to close shattered along with it. Qinghe hurriedly apologized, terrified that he had ruined everything. But Zhuang Cheng forced himself to remember one truth: a fork and a cake could never stand on the same side. He firmly brushed Qinghe's hand away, reminding himself that he could not allow his resolve to weaken again. Qinghe could only watch in silence, unable to understand why their hearts seemed to be drifting farther apart. And just as the room fell into complete silence, an unexpected knock echoed through the night. The knock at the door in the middle of the night was not from the person chasing them. It was a young woman leading familiar guests into a hidden place. After asking only a few questions, Zhuang Cheng confirmed that the place he had been looking for was still operating. Without hesitation, he motioned for Guang Qinghe to follow him. Qinghe had no idea where they were going. He only felt the hallway growing colder with every step. He clumsily bumped into the furniture again, and Zhuang Cheng instinctively started to turn back before stopping himself. He tried to keep his distance, yet his instinct still made him quietly look out for Qinghe. The door at the end of the hallway slowly opened, revealing a completely different world behind it. It was an underground gambling room, where every glance was filled with suspicion, and the rules were more intimidating than the cards themselves. Qinghe quietly stayed behind Zhuang Cheng, trying to hide his uneasiness. Although he remained distant, Zhuang Cheng deliberately changed seats so Qinghe would be farther away from the most dangerous person in the room. But Qinghe simply thought it was probably just a coincidence. Meanwhile, Zhuang Cheng secretly let out a sigh of relief because Qinghe had finally stopped looking at him with those eyes. Then the real rules of the game were revealed. Once you sat down at the table, you were not allowed to leave before the designated time, whether you won or lost. If you ran out of money, you would be offered a loan, and then forced to repay the debt by any means necessary. Zhuang Cheng quickly realized that the two people sitting across from them were experienced players. As for Qinghe, he did not even fully understand the rules of the game, which meant he was almost certain to lose everything. And that was exactly what Zhuang Cheng had planned from the very beginning. As long as Qinghe was kept there, Zhuang Cheng would have enough time to carry out his plan without dragging him into greater danger. But Qinghe could only quietly blame himself, never realizing that he was slowly becoming the most important piece in Zhuang Cheng's plan. Guang Qinghe tried to focus on the card game, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Zhuang Cheng. The voices urging him to make his move pulled him back to reality. The distance between the two of them quickly caught everyone's attention. Within minutes, people had already begun speculating about the relationship between Zhuang Cheng and Guang Qinghe. One man approached with a smile that carried obvious intentions. He sat down beside Qinghe and casually started a conversation as if they had known each other for years. Qinghe immediately refused and quietly leaned away, but the man did not stop. Instead, he moved even closer. What made him even bolder was that Zhuang Cheng appeared completely indifferent, as if he had not noticed anything. Believing Qinghe had no one to protect him, the man became even more shameless. He grabbed Qinghe's wrist, making him instantly feel sick and weak all over. Qinghe could only look toward Zhuang Cheng, hoping he would turn around. But instead of concern, all he felt were countless eyes fixed on him. In that moment, Qinghe finally understood what Zhuang Cheng had always endured as a cake surrounded by forks. It was not about fearing one person. It was about living beneath countless watchful eyes, always waiting for an opportunity. That realization hurt Qinghe more deeply than any physical wound. Even so, all he wanted was to be close to Zhuang Cheng one more time. The man continued pressing forward, even trying to take Qinghe away from the room. The atmosphere instantly became unbearably tense. Just then, another hand suddenly clamped tightly around the man's wrist. Zhuang Cheng finally stepped in. With a single move, he pulled the man away from Qinghe and coldly warned him not to cross the line. Qinghe stood frozen as the tension finally caught up with him, leaving him dizzy. By instinct, he leaned against the only person who still made him feel safe. In that brief moment, all the distance between them seemed to disappear. But just as Qinghe quietly whispered that he only wanted to go home, the atmosphere inside the gambling room began to shift, signaling that an even greater crisis was about to unfold. Guang Qinghe's body burned with fever, and his breathing became so unsteady that even Zhuang Cheng realized something was wrong. He staggered forward and instinctively clung to Zhuang Cheng, repeating only one wish: to go home. For a brief moment, Zhuang Cheng hesitated, as his plan to keep his distance began to fall apart. But the man's crude taunts inside the gambling room shattered that hesitation. Zhuang Cheng did not answer with words. Instead, he responded with a powerful kick that sent the man crashing backward. The entire room fell silent as everyone around them stood up at once. Even so, Zhuang Cheng remained perfectly calm, as if nothing had happened. He quietly returned the knife to its owner, but the gesture alone was enough to make the man realize how close he had come to losing everything. One cold warning was all it took to silence him completely. After that, Zhuang Cheng immediately decided to leave the dangerous place with Guang Qinghe. Dawn was beginning to break by the time they returned to the quiet house. Qinghe curled curled up on the couch as his fever continued to worsen. Zhuang Cheng searched the entire house for medicine, but everything he found was either expired or unusable. At that moment, Qinghe struggled to his feet and whispered an apology through his fever. For the first time, he admitted that he had never truly understood what it felt like to be looked at as prey. Through trembling breaths, Qinghe confessed that he only hoped Zhuang Cheng would never see him as just another fork. Before he could finish speaking, his strength gave out and he collapsed. Zhuang Cheng caught him before he could hit the floor. Looking at the feverish Qinghe in his arms, Zhuang Cheng still forced himself to appear indifferent. He kept telling himself that he was only helping because the situation demanded it, not because his heart had softened. Yet it was he who stayed by Qinghe's side and cared for him throughout the entire night. As he brought the medicine closer, Qinghe suddenly reached out and held Zhuang Cheng's hand in his feverish haze. Guided by the instincts of a sick fork, Qinghe unconsciously reached for the only sense of safety he had left. Zhuang Cheng could only stare silently at the hand holding his. Because he was beginning to realize that the distance between them was changing in a way that could never be undone. The fever left Guang Qinghe completely out of control, and he instinctively stumbled toward Zhuang Cheng. By reflex, Zhuang Cheng was about to push him away, but he stopped himself at the last second. In that moment, painful memories of other forks suddenly flooded his mind. Yet this time, he decided to place his trust in Guang Qinghe one more time. Qinghe remained unconscious, completely unaware of what was happening. All he wanted was something to hold onto as he struggled against the overwhelming discomfort. Zhuang Cheng watched quietly and realized that Qinghe's behavior was nothing like what he had seen before. There was no aggression, nor any desire to hurt anyone. There was only someone desperately trying to resist instincts he did not even understand. The harder Qinghe fought against them, the more exhausted he became. When his emotions finally reached their limit, tears suddenly rolled down his face. That single moment left Zhuang Cheng speechless. Through his tears, Qinghe recalled everything he had ever heard about forks and began to question himself. He was terrified that one day he would become just like the people Zhuang Cheng hated most. He kept apologizing, even though none of this was what he had ever wanted. For the first time, Zhuang Cheng saw genuine fear in the eyes of a fork. He gently held Qinghe by the shoulders, trying to help him calm down. The fever showed no sign of breaking, and Qinghe gradually lost all his strength after crying. Zhuang Cheng could only support him and check on his condition once again. A question he had never considered before began to form in his mind. Perhaps Guang Qinghe was carrying a painful past that Zhuang Cheng had never known about. And from that moment on, Zhuang Cheng realized. What confused him most was no longer Guang Qinghe's identity, but the change slowly taking place in his own heart. Zhuang Cheng sat quietly beside the bed, watching Guang Qinghe sleep. He realized that the distance between them had quietly begun to change, and that realization made him uneasy. To Zhuang Cheng, trusting someone had always been the most dangerous thing of all. Once you grew used to warmth, you became afraid of losing it. Memories filled with bloodshed and betrayal pulled him back into the past. Zhuang Cheng told himself that if he let go now, it might not be too late. As long as Guang Qinghe walked away, everything would come to an end. But a familiar voice echoed inside his mind. It kept asking whether he truly wanted to push Guang Qinghe away. Images of Qinghe apologizing, crying, and trying to protect him flashed through his thoughts, along with every sincere confession Qinghe had ever made. Each memory slowly weakened Zhuang Cheng's determination. That voice reached one conclusion: he had already begun to care. But then it reminded him that his unfinished revenge still remained. Zhuang Cheng immediately rejected every feeling that had begun to grow. At that moment, Guang Qinghe finally woke from his lingering fever. He realized that he was still in Zhuang Cheng's house. Everything around him suggested that Zhuang Cheng had taken care of him throughout the night. That realization left Qinghe both grateful and confused. He reminded himself not to misunderstand that kindness. After all, Zhuang Cheng had never said he had forgiven him. When Zhuang Cheng entered the room, Qinghe instinctively avoided his gaze, not because he disliked him, but because he felt too embarrassed. The silence between them grew almost unbearable. At last, Zhuang Cheng was the first to break it. He brought up the injuries on his own body. Then, without hesitation, he revealed the countless scars that had remained with him for years. Qinghe was speechless at the sight of how severe they were. Only one question remained in his mind: what had Zhuang Cheng been forced to go through? Seeing Qinghe look away, Zhuang Cheng misunderstood the gesture. He assumed Qinghe was frightened and disappointed by his past. Qinghe immediately shook his head. He had never found those scars disturbing. The only thing he worried about was that the way he looked at them might make Zhuang Cheng uncomfortable. That answer made Zhuang Cheng pause for the first time. Qinghe admitted that he was only worried because Zhuang Cheng had once been hurt by forks. Zhuang Cheng looked at him silently for a long moment, then made a choice Qinghe never could have imagined. He lifted his shirt a little higher and calmly asked, "If you are really worried, Would you like to take a closer look? Zhuang Cheng calmly revealed his old scars and surprised Guang Qinghe with an unexpected question. Qinghe was left speechless, unable to understand why Zhuang Cheng suddenly trusted him so much. Gently, Zhuang Cheng guided Qinghe's hand to a scar that had long since healed. Qinghe froze. It was not the scar that made his heart race. It was how close they had become. Zhuang Cheng quickly realized that Qinghe was still too nervous, so he changed his approach. Instead, he asked about Qinghe's past, starting with the day he became a fork. Qinghe quietly replied. It had all begun when he was 14 years old. Zhuang Cheng continued asking questions, wanting to know who had first discovered his secret. Qinghe suddenly realized that Zhuang Cheng had called him by his name, no longer keeping the emotional distance he once had. That tiny change alone was enough to make Qinghe's heart skip a beat. But that reaction only convinced Zhuang Cheng that Qinghe was hiding a deeply painful memory. He took Qinghe's hand and quietly said that he did not have to carry everything alone anymore. If that past is too heavy, tell me about it. After a long silence, Qinghe finally nodded. His memories carried him back to his high school years, where he first met Zhang Yanji. Yanji was the first person to discover that Qinghe was a fork. Yet he was never afraid of him. He treated Qinghe like an ordinary friend, giving him his first real sense of acceptance. For a short time, Qinghe truly believed he could live like everyone else. Then everything changed when Yanji started dating Zhou Yi. At first, the three of them spent time together, but the distance between them slowly grew. Qinghe chose to step away because he did not want to become a burden. Until one night, Yanji suddenly called him in a panic, desperately asking for help. Qinghe rushed to the location without hesitation, but before he could get there, everything had already spiraled out of control. Then Zhuang Cheng offered a completely different theory. In his opinion, Zhou Yi had not acted on impulse. He had deliberately arranged everything so Qinghe would witness it. Qinghe stood frozen, realizing he had never considered that possibility before. Zhuang Cheng firmly told him that none of it had been Qinghe's fault, and that he had done everything he possibly could. For the first time in many years, Qinghe heard words that finally began to lift the weight he had carried for so long. Meanwhile, Zhuang Cheng quietly watched him, wondering, if they had met earlier, could everything have turned out differently? After their emotionally charged conversation, Zhuang Cheng made a proposal that left Guang Qinghe completely speechless. He wanted Qinghe to become his partner as a fork. For the first time, Zhuang Cheng spoke about being kidnapped at the age of 13 and the scars that had never truly healed. He did not need someone to protect him. He needed someone who could help identify the forks hiding among ordinary people. His goal was clear, to track down every person responsible for the tragedy years ago. But Zhuang Cheng also made one thing clear. He was only after those responsible and had no intention of dragging innocent people into his revenge. In return, he promised to help Qinghe keep his identity hidden and live more safely. Qinghe did not know whether to accept or refuse, because the offer felt more like an act of trust than a deal. Zhuang Cheng calmly told him there was no need to decide immediately, since Qinghe could not leave yet anyway. Then something unexpected happened. Zhuang Cheng casually lay down to rest right in front of Qinghe, as if he had entrusted all of his vulnerabilities to him. Qinghe quietly watched him sleep, finding the man before him harder and harder to understand. He was cautious about everything, yet somehow willing to place his trust in Qinghe. He gradually realized that the invitation to become his fork partner was not only about revenge, it was also Zhuang Cheng's way of protecting himself. But the more he thought about it, the more he felt he was too weak to stand beside him. Memories of all the times he had failed to protect the people who mattered most came flooding back, filling him with guilt. He quietly admitted that he was afraid of becoming a burden and being left behind one day. At that moment, Zhuang Cheng suddenly opened his eyes. He gently pulled Qinghe closer, and calmly said that he had never needed anyone to protect him. If someone had to be the protector, it would always be Zhuang Cheng. Those simple words widened the crack in the emotional distance between them even further. While Qinghe was still struggling to understand his own feelings, night quietly settled outside the apartment. Just when everything seemed peaceful, a mysterious figure appeared in the hallway and silently made a phone call. Only one sentence could be heard: "I found them." And with those words, the real hunt had finally begun. At this point, do you think Zhuang Cheng has truly begun to trust Guang Qinghe? Or is everything still part of his plan? If you were Guang Qinghe, would you accept Zhuang Cheng's offer and become his fork partner to uncover the truth together? Who do you think was the person who made the call saying, "I found them"? And who will make the first move, the mysterious pursuer or Zhuang Cheng? Share your theories in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe to see how the next confrontation will change both of their lives forever.